we look at the past, I would hope we can get inspired by looking at the craftsmanship and looking at the details and long to build better because we see beautiful things like this. We are studying the Romantic era, and so I did a lot of research here about there is a ton of change that's happened, okay? And we are getting into the Victorian era, okay? This is the beginning of that. Last time was Greek Revival. If you look at where we are here, we did the Georgian one, the Federal run, the Greek Revival. We're now into this area right here, Victorian, okay? Victorian kind of gets a bad name. It's kind of a, either people love the style or they hate it. And so there's things about it I love it and things about it I hate it. But I've split the Victorian into two parts. And we've got this early part, which is 1830 to 1870, essentially right around. Do you want to just pick up these chairs and move them back there?
Okay. Yeah.
Let's just do that so you're not sitting on the front row. And so there is. Now you are. And so we've split up this Victorian into two areas, and this is the first part of it. And what you're going to see is you're going to see a lot of change the design side of it, and you're going to see a lot of change on the building side of it and all the technology that's happening. So basically what we're going to be talking about, this Romantic era. Why is it called the Romantic era, this picturesque era? The three styles we're going to be studying: the Gothic, Revival, Italianate, and Second Empire. We're going to have a quiz in the second episode of this, and we're going to try to choose the style. Victorian's really hard for me to recognize and go, what style is that? What's going on? The Victorian era is, in my opinion, the McMansion era of this time, okay? So they're influenced by all these things. Second Empire is obviously French, Italianate is Italian, Gothic is Gothic, but they're the influential, there's Persian, there's Egyptian, there's all these different revivals going on there. Why? Well, the world's opening up, right? You've got steamer ships now, you've got railroads, and the world's grown smaller, and they're looking out going, what can we be inspired by? So just realize the Victorian era, I think people look and go, that's a Victorian house, but it's not, what kind of Victorian house, and we'll get into more of that. But it's confusing for me, and so I suspect it's confusing for a lot of people. We're going to be talking about Town and Davis, Ithiel Town and A.J. Davis, two architects, very different types of architects, but they really are the beginning of the architectural profession and when this all changes. Remember, we talked about Bulfinch and some of the other guys before. Those guys couldn't make a living in architecture, right? They couldn't do it. And so these guys are kind of the first era of being very successful architects. And then we talk generally in these buildings and brews about masonry or moldings or ironwork. We're actually going to talk about the steam engine and what it does for manufacturing. So what's happening in America? I've picked 1860 as this kind of time period. We're growing. Like, you think what happens to the U.S. in a period of 100 years is we go from an upstart colony to a country by 1780 to a world power 100 years later, right? It's kind of crazy. I mean, there's no other example in history of a upstart nation growing to be the biggest, the most powerful, and what we did. And it's fascinating, and it obviously changes what we're building. You think about the growth, we went from 13 colonies now to 26 states, and by 1860, we've now taken over the whole country. We'll show you maps of that. New York's still the fastest and growing, and it continues to be. We're really changing from the handmade to the machine made. And so this is the beginning of the end for that old handmade era. And we start to see industrialization taking place in building. Balloon framing, we'll talk about that, it's kind of fun. And then sawmills, and of course the architects become these influencers. And there's this Andrew Jackson Downing, not Alexander Jackson Davis, okay, two guys, A.J. Davis, A.J. Downing. they end up being the Martha Stewarts of their era, right? They end up becoming extremely influential. So look what happens to the U.S. We were here, and by 1860 we're here. This map shows, this is, the Louisiana Purchase was right in here, and then the California, it became a state 1850, 1859 for Oregon, right? You see these different, we have all this west to conquer and all this stuff going on, but we're growing very fast. Our population has exploded, and we've got all this growth taking place. Look what's happened as far as the biggest cities. The top 5, right, are East Coast cities that are kind of the old hat, they've been there for a while. Look at the 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. New Orleans, Cincinnati, St. Louis, Chicago, New York, okay? I think it's the next map. These guys there's St. Louis, there's Cincinnati, there's Chicago, there's Buffalo, okay? All the other things are over here, right? New York and Boston and everything else. The country is expanding this way. And so there's kind of this perfect storm of what's going on here. I've got this thing drawn up somewhere. Kind of what's happened in our country. And Cincinnati kind of represents the perfect storm here of what's going on. In this period, okay, we have industrialization because of the steam engine, and the steam engine changing how things are built, how people think about things, and Americans especially are advanced and industrious, and they overcome so many things. Example, by the way, the best book, and the book I read it and then I listened to it, and it's just fascinating. It's this book called The Dawn of Innovation. Highly recommend it. He talks about how America really becomes this world power, and it starts with a bunch of little things. An example that they use is the American system of manufacturing. What that is basically trying to find a company who can make replaceable parts, okay? And think of making a gun, and being able to make all these parts that are exactly the same, that are interchangeable. So shoot 3 guns, take them apart, mix the parts up, and shoot 3 guns again, right? It was unheard of. You can't do that. Americans, the way they approached that, by 1850, Samuel Colt, basically with his pistols, had figured out how to do it, and was the marvel of the Crystal Palace Fair in 1851 in England, where England's showing off all this stuff, and this upstart American comes along with a pistol and shows Europe how to do it. In fact, the guy points out in this book that even by 1920, when Cadillac brought 3 cars over to England, drove 3 cars, took them apart, changed the parts, and then drove them again, it just blew their mind, okay? That kind of puts you that's 1920, right? Puts you in the mindset of how Americans approached building and thinking about doing stuff. The British and the Europeans were so far ahead of us, and yet we caught up in a very short period of time. And there's an American ideal, I think I say, the face of our country emerges. It's fascinating to me how innovative we were about things and how it surprised Europeans. Part of it, and this goes back to this whirling storm of craziness going on, is that we allow an immigration. That, that Tocqueville, remember he came through and wrote his little story about traveling through America. He's fascinated by the fact that there really is no class structure. That you don't have to be blue blood in order to achieve things. You look at Andrew Carnegie. He started out as a mailroom boy. You look at Cornelius Vanderbilt. He was a scoundrel, and yet these guys were industry leaders, and it just astounded the Europeans kind of how we thought, and there wasn't a class structure. So you see all these things that are going on in this period: industrialization, the steam engine, the American approach to manufacturing. Transportation is changing really fast, and so you have this. I'll show this example of Cincinnati, but transportation is huge in this whole era. that there's a rising middle class. Okay, the fact that we are building the houses that we're building has to do with you have people that can afford them and want to do it. This is the first time we have suburbs, right? And so, most times if you're looking at 1800s in Boston, these cities, they're townhouses, they're houses where a craftsman might have is living upstairs and his shop's in this open window. The fact that you'll see these houses that are out in the suburbs, they're really just outside of downtown, but they are, this is the first time that starts to happen. Front porches, right? Front porches weren't really a thing until this period. So there's so many crazy innovative things. Immigration, it's just crazy how fast we were growing. There was 6 million immigrants between 1820 and 1860, I think, and then between 1860 and 1900, there's like 23 million. Well, realize our population's 31 million in 1860, and you consider that 20% of those came in through immigration. Our country is exploding, right? Very big. Now, Cincinnati is kind of the poster child of and it's a microcosm of what America's doing. Cincinnati is founded in 1788, so basically 1790. In 1800, it has 850 people there, okay? By 1840, it's the 6th largest city in the U.S., okay? How does that happen? It goes 850, 2540, 9642, 24,000, and then 46,000, okay, by 1840. And it's the top 10 size of city in America for like 30 years. Essentially what happens is in 1840, okay, first of all, Cincinnati is on the Ohio River, okay? And so the point of this thing was showing you that St. Louis is on the Missouri River, Cincinnati is on the Ohio River, Chicago's on Lake Michigan, Buffalo's on Lake Erie. These are all connected by canals, right? By the 1820s, 1830s. So 1840, the steam-powered paddle ships, right? Which means that someone in Ohio can go all the way over here and go to St. Louis and down to New Orleans. Forgot about New Orleans down there. New Orleans is the 5th largest. So you have all these cities that are growing here, and it's all because they're on transportation lines, okay? So 1840 paddle boat, about 15 years later, the canals open. Basically, the Miami-Erie Canal was started in Toledo and came down here and connected Lake Erie to the Ohio River. And then by 1850s, the railroads. And so you had this city that was just, it was growing by, I think, 150% or 100% each year, something like that. It was just exploding. And that is just a microcosm of what America was doing, right? Immigrants coming in, and realize that the immigrants coming in were middle class, okay? They had owned stores in Germany. They had been craftsmen, and they'd had a skill. You had the potato famine in Ireland. A lot of Irish people came over. You had a lot of Germans coming over at this time. So the immigration that's coming in are highly skilled and people that are ready to throw in and work hard. So all this stuff is happening. It's a storm. It's crazy. All the change that's happening so quick. And, just realize as we talk about all these changes that are going on, that this is happening very quickly.